The great hall at Hartland was full of morning light and the smell of coffee, and at the north end of it, under the minstrel's gallery, a wide panel of the oak screen stood covered over with a sheet of green baize. 40 of the county had been asked to see it uncovered. They stood about with cups in their hands. The sun came down through the tall south windows in long slabs across the floor, and a fire had been built up in the great stone hearth, though the day was warm. It was the 9th of the month. On the 18th the king would come into that hall on his way north, and everything in it had been scrubbed, regilt, or replaced. At a small table against the wall sat a small, straight-backed young woman, with dark hair pinned flat under a plain cap, grey eyes, and ink on the side of her right hand, in a worn grey stuff gown and a crimson wool shawl. Nobody had presented her to anybody. She had sat there 3 weeks, lettering the Hartland pedigree onto a roll of vellum 9 feet long at 8 shillings the sheet, and the company walked round her as they would have walked round a step-ladder. Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Hartland, took hold of the baize himself and brought it down. He was a tall, fair-haired man with a long jaw and a high-coloured, handsome face, in a black cutaway coat, dove-grey waistcoat and white stock, and he was enjoying himself. The county made a proper noise, because it was a very fine thing. 12 feet of new painted achievement, gold-leafed and varnished, and blazing in the window light. A shield of 4 quarters, a helm, a coronet, mantling like torn silk, a crest, and a scroll. "Well, Hartland," said Sir Marmaduke Ferrand, a stout, gouty, honest baronet who had known him since he was in Nan Keynes, "what is all that? In English?" "It is not in English, Ferrand, and never has been." The Duke put his hands behind his back and gave it to them as a man deals cards, quickly and with pleasure, in the Norman French of the trade. Or a hart springing argent, attired and ungueled of the field, 2nd and 3rd, gules 3 escallops argent, for Ferrand, 4th as the 1st. Upon the whole the helm, the coronet, and for crest a hart's head kaboshed. Mantling gules, doubled ermine. There, not one of you is the wiser, and that is rather the point of it. They laughed, and then his eye went along the wall and found the small grey figure at the table with the pen in her hand. "But we have an authority among us," he said. "Miss Merrow letters my pedigree at 8 shillings the sheet, and I am told she letters very prettily. Come, madam, construe it for the company, or shall I spare you? Blazon is not a woman's tongue. I will lay Ferrand a shilling she cannot tell me a fess from a bar." Somebody by the hearth chuckled into a coffee cup. A young man near the windows grinned broadly and said something behind his hand, and the county turned and looked at her the way 40 people look at one, all together, and waited to be amused. Miss Cecily Merrow laid her pen down across the neck of the ink bottle so that it should not roll, and stood up and did not hurry. "A fess is the middle third of the shield," she said. "A bar is narrower and never comes single. But that is not what is wrong with it, your grace. And as you have asked me before the company, I had better answer you before the company." The hall went quiet in patches, the way a hall does. "Your field is gold. It has always been blue. Azure, a heart springing argent, colour, then metal, which is the whole law of the thing. Your painter has laid a silver heart upon a gold ground, because gold tells better at a distance, and metal upon metal is a coat that cannot be borne in England. It is not your arms, it is not anybody's arms." The Duke's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "2nd and 3rd quarters, Ferrand," she went on, in exactly the voice of a woman reading out a tradesman's account. I have had your pedigree in my 2 hands for 3 weeks. There is no Ferrand heiress in it. There is a purchase of the manor of Ferrand's Cross by your great-grandfather for £11,000, and I have lettered the date of the conveyance myself. Arms do not pass with a manor. You may buy the land, you may not buy the blood, and you may not quarter what has not come to you by an heiress of the name. That will do, said the Duke. And the helm over it is a knight's steel set square to the front, the visor open. A peer's helm is silver, garnished with gold, shown in profile and barred. The coronet is worse. Yours should carry 8 strawberry leaves. That one carries pearls upon points, which belongs to an earl. She let it stand 1 moment, and then finished it. You have been painted 2 degrees under your own rank, 12 feet high, in your own hall, and the king comes into this hall on the 9th day from today. Nobody laughed at all. It is very handsome work, Your Grace, Miss Merrow said. It is not your arms. She looked down at the vellum, and then back at him, level, with her hands quiet in front of her. Shall I go on with the lettering, or will you have me stop? What the Duke of Hartland ought to have done was laugh, and say that he had been served exactly right, and send for a ladder. What he did was worse than anything the painter had put on the panel. Mr. Skeel, he said, without taking his eyes off her, who engaged this person? Barnaby Skeel came forward out of the group by the hearth, a spare, quick, agreeable man with sandy whiskers, and a habit of agreeing before he had heard the end of a sentence, in a bottle-green coat. He said that he had engaged her himself, on a recommendation, at a very moderate figure, the college's own officers being so shockingly dear. Then pay her, and let her go this morning. The achievement stands as it is painted. It was designed by Mr. Sylvanus Pike, who has done the like for 4 dukes, and I do not propose to have it scraped off my own screen on the word of a woman who rules lines for a living. He turned to the room and got his voice back up to the pitch he used for the county. Coffee is going cold. It did not answer. He had made a small public sport of a servant which the county would have forgiven him in an hour, and then, before 40 witnesses, he had refused to look at a fact. Sir Marmaduke Ferrand did not go back to his coffee. He walked up the hall, put his head back, and stood under the panel a long time with his stick planted in front of him, and everybody watched him do it. Then he came down and said, in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as it needed to, "She is right about the helm. Hartland, my father's is on his monument in Ferrand Church, and it is that helm exactly. And my father was a baronet. Miss Merrow had already begun to put her things together. She did it as unhurriedly as she had spoken, the pen wiped, the ink bottle stoppered, the pounce and the knife and the 2 sable brushes laid in their places in the flat deal box, the 9 feet of vellum rolled from the foot up and tied with tape. She made no sort of scene and did not look at anybody, and 40 people who had come to see a coat of arms uncovered found they were watching a woman pack a box instead, and could not for the life of them stop. Skeel came over, going pink, and counted money into her hand. She counted it again in front of him, said it was 2 shillings over, gave him back 2 shillings, and asked for a line in writing to say the work was left unfinished by the Duke's order, and through no fault of hers, because she would be asked. He wrote it on the corner of her own table, with her own pen, Then she put on her bonnet, took the deal box under one arm and the roll under the other, and walked the length of the great hall to the door, with 40 of the county standing back on both sides to let her pass, in her grey gown and her crimson shawl, past the fire, past the Duke, without a word to him, and without once dropping her eyes, and the porter, who had had no orders about any of this, opened both leaves of the great door for her, as though she were somebody, and she went out into the sun. It is worth saying who she was, because the county was saying it before her cart was off the drive. Her father had been Mr. Hugh Merrow, sometime Rouge Croix pursuivant of arms, an officer of the college, one of the men whose whole business is the descent, the marshalling and the record of the arms of England. She had been reared in a set of rooms in the college precinct within hearing of the river, and had learned the letters of it before she learned the Psalms. How to trick a coat in pen and ink, how to draw a pedigree so that a stranger could read a family off it in one sweep, and how to tell in half a minute the difference between a descent that has been proved and one that has merely been asserted. Very often, her father had lost the place. There had been some question about an entry. She had been 15 and told very little, and had believed for a while that it would be put right. It was not. He had come out of the precinct with his books in a barrow, and had died within the year over a stationer's shop in the market town, owing money to a coal merchant, and his daughter had been left with his hands, his eye, his tools, and no office to use them in, because the offices of arms are not held by women and never have been. So she lettered pedigrees, tricked coats for monumental masons, painted hatchments at 3 guineas, and lived in the 2 rooms over that same shop, and when Mr. Barnaby Skeel wanted the Hartland pedigree made handsome for a royal visit, and did not care to pay the college's fees, she was cheap and she was very good. She had known within 4 days of taking the work that the Ferrand quarter would not stand, and had said nothing, because nobody had asked her. She had gone on lettering, had left a hand's breadth of vellum blank where the Ferrand marriage ought to have been entered, and had made up her mind to mention it quietly at the end, when the roll was delivered and paid for. Then he had asked her before 40 people, and she had been asked, in her father's own trade by a man who did not know his own coat, whether she could tell a fess from a bar. A county is a slow animal with a very long memory and no discretion whatever. By dinner that same day the thing had gone round 12 houses, and had already found the shape it would keep. Nobody told it as the tale of a duke corrected. They told it as the tale of a duke who had bet a shilling that a woman could not tell a fess from a bar, and had then been told before 40 people that he had had himself painted as a knight. By the 4th day, it was in London, because 2 of the 40 went up to town on the Wednesday and could not help themselves, and it reached his club before he did. On the 5th, it was in a print shop window in St. James's Street. A tall, fair gentleman in a black coat, under an enormous escutcheon with a saucepan on his head instead of a helm, and a small woman in a shawl holding up one finger. And in one of the newspapers, in the paragraph column, between a bankruptcy and a mad ox at Highgate, there appeared 4 printed lines to the effect that a certain noble Duke of the West was about to receive an august visitor beneath an achievement of arms said by persons of skill to belong to nobody at all. That paragraph was the hinge of everything that followed, though the man who wrote it was paid 4 shillings for it and never knew. The Duke of Hartland fought it for 4 days, which was 3.5 days longer than the case would bear. He sent an express to London for Mr. Sylvanus Pike, and Mr. Sylvanus Pike came down by the mail, a plump, pink, delighted man, with pomaded curls and paint under his nails, in a plum-coloured coat, and looked up at his own work a long time with his hat in both hands. "It is a beautiful piece of decoration, Your Grace," said Mr. Pike at last. "It is my coat of arms." "It is a beautiful piece of decoration," Mr. Pike said again, more quietly, and Mr. Skeel's instructions were that it must tell from the far end of a hall 110 feet long, and the ground was to be gold because the panelling is dark. "And I did say, Your Grace, I said it to Mr. Skeel in this room, that the college would want to be consulted upon the marshalling." Mr. Skeel said we would not be troubling the college on account of the fees. Mr. Skeel, sent for, could not immediately be found. Then the Duke wrote to the College of Arms himself. He did not ask a question, he stated a position, in the tone of a man who expects to be agreed with, and mentioned the royal visit twice. The answer came back in 3 lines, and cost him more than any letter he had ever received. It thanked His Grace for his communication, observed that no achievement composed of a metal charge upon a metal field could be borne by any subject of the crown, that the arms of Ferrand appeared in no certified pedigree of His Grace's house, and that a peer's helm was of silver, garnished with gold, in profile and barred. It was signed by a clerk. He read it standing at the window, and then he did the thing that afterwards he could least bear to remember, which was not the joke, and not the panel, but this. He rang, and told Skeel, who had by then been found, that Miss Merrow was to have no further work in the county. Not the monumental masons, not the attorneys who used her for abstracts, not the church at Ferrand, nor anybody else between the sea and the county town. "It will be understood," said Skeel, going pink again, "that she is not to be employed." "It will be understood," said the Duke. It was understood in 9 hours. 3 days later she sat over the stationer's shop with a bare table, having been told very kindly by 4 different men that there was nothing at present, and having been paid off by a 5th in the middle of a job with the brushes still wet. She did not write to anybody about it, and she did not go to Sir Marmaduke Frayne, who would have taken it up and made a noise. She asked the stationer whether she might have the rent by the month instead of the quarter for a while, and he said she might, and she went back up and unrolled a sheet of practice vellum and ruled it, because a hand that is not used every day goes in a fortnight, and she was not going to lose the one thing she had left. On the 7th day a note was brought to her from Hartland, unsigned, in a clerk's hand, enclosing a banknote for £50 and expressing a hope that the matter would now be permitted to drop. She wrote back the same afternoon and returned the note. She enclosed her account for the lettering already delivered, itemized, at 8 shillings the sheet for 11 sheets and 1 shilling and 9 pence for gold, and observed that it had been settled in full on the 9th, and that she had no other claim upon His Grace of any kind. And at the foot of it, because she was human, she added 1 line in the round upright hand she used for headings: "The arms are still wrong." What the Duke of Hartland had not understood, and what Mr. Sylvanus Pike had understood perfectly, was that a coat of arms is not an ornament. It is a public statement of who a man is descended from, made in a language the crown owns, and when a subject makes it wrongly in a room the king is about to walk into, it stops being the subject's business. The 4 printed lines were read at breakfast by the Earl Marshal's secretary. Mr. Nathaniel Prowse, York Herald, was already coming down to marshal the ceremonial of the visit, and his instructions were altered by one sentence. Before he set out, he was to satisfy himself, in passing, as to the achievement in the great hall. He arrived on the 12th, a dry, long-necked man in a plain black coat and half-moon spectacles, with a way of reading a page twice before he said anything about it, and he brought a japanned tin case with the certified Hartland pedigree in it, sealed, as recorded in the books of the college in the old Duke's time. He stood under the panel 6 minutes with his hat on. Then he asked to see the muniment room and the estate accounts of the old Duke's day, and then he said he should want somebody who could read a secretary hand, and asked who in the county was used to old writing. "There is nobody," said Mr. Skeel. "There is Miss Merrow," said Sir Marmaduke Frayne, who had come over for no reason except to be there when this happened. Mr. Prowse said that he had been at her father's funeral and would send for her within the hour, and when Skeel began, unhappily, upon a difficulty, the herald looked at him over the half-moons and said that he was in the county upon the king's business, that he would employ whom he chose, and that a cart had better be sent, as the lady would not be able to afford one. She came and brought her own glass and her own tracing paper, and did not so much as look at the great hall on her way through it. They worked in the muniment room until the candles were wanted, and it was she who found it, because Prowse had put the certified pedigree before her and asked her to read out the entries for the 4th generation. She read 3 of them aloud in a perfectly steady voice. Then she stopped. "Go on," said Prowse. She did not go on. She turned the sheet a little towards the window, and looked at it, and put her glass down without hurry, and sat back, and the herald, who had spent 30 years watching faces over documents, took the sheet gently out from under her hand, and read the entry himself, and then a second time, which was his habit, and then looked at the attestation at the foot of it. The Ferrand descent was there, Eleanor Ferrand, daughter and heir, the marriage, the quartering allowed in consequence. It was entered in a small, beautiful, upright hand, the tinctures tricked in the margin in ink gone brown, and under it, in the same hand, entered upon the information of His Grace the Duke of Hartland, and the exhibition of evidences, by me, Hugh Merrow, Rouge Croix Pursuivant of Arms. "That is my father's hand," said Miss Merrow. Nobody in the room said anything for a while. Outside somebody was raking gravel. "There were no evidences," she said. "There cannot have been. There is no such marriage. I have been 3 weeks in this house looking for it in every book they have, and I left a hand's breadth blank on the roll because I could not find it. And it is not there, because it did not happen." Her voice was exactly as level as it had been in the great hall, which was the worst part of it. He wrote that. Mr. Prowse turned the estate accounts round on the table and went back through the old Duke's payments with one long finger. He found it on the 3rd book. It was entered plainly, as such things always are, because the men who do them have no notion that anybody will ever look. A sum paid to Mr. Merrow of the College of Arms, being for the search and entry of the descent from Ferrand, and a further sum, larger, described as a gratuity. Hugh Merrow had been struck off the roll of the college for an entry made without proof. His daughter had grown up knowing that sentence, and never the entry it referred to. He had never told her, and she had never asked, because she had been 15 and had believed there was a mistake in it, and then he had died. She had found it herself, at a table in the house of the man who had paid for it, on a job she had been given because she was cheap. You understand, Prowse said at last, very carefully, that this is now two things and not one. The arms as painted are wrong, which is a matter of a fortnight and a ladder. The quartering is wrong in the books of the college, and it was put there by an officer of arms paid to put it there by the head of this house. That is not a painter's error. That is a false entry in the records of the Crown. Yes, said Miss Merrow. It will have to be laid before the Earl Marshal. Yes, your father's name is in it and cannot be kept out of it. If I write this report, madam, I make the case against him that the college only suspected. You will have turned a suspicion into a proved fact, and you will have done it yourself, reading it out to me. She sat and looked at the brown ink for a long moment. Write it, she said. Mr. Prowse laid it before the Duke of Hartland that same evening in the muniment room, with the certified pedigree open on the table between them and the estate accounts beside it. He did it as such men do, flatly, in order, without one word of feeling, and then he set out the two roads. Your Grace may leave the record as it stands. Nothing compels you to disturb it. The painting is the public matter, and the painting can be scraped. The entry in the books of the college is 100 years old, and there is not a living soul with an interest in disputing it. If it is ever raised hereafter, it will be answered, as it was answered at the time, that an officer of arms made an entry he could not support, and was struck off for it, and is dead. And the other road, your Grace disclaims the quartering, in writing, under your hand, to the Earl Marshal, that the arms of Ferrand have been borne by your house without right, that the entry was procured by the late Duke your father, and that the officer who made it did so upon your father's information and for your father's money. You will not be prosecuted, and you will not lose your title or an acre of your land. What you will lose is the quarter. And every coach panel, seal, hatchment, gate, and prayer book in your possession will be wrong and must be done again. And every man in England who has ever envied you will know why. The Duke sat with his hands flat on the table on either side of the open pedigree, in the position of a man reading, and did not read. How long has my house borne that quarter? 4 generations. My father bought it. Your father bought it, said Mr. Prowse, and here is what he paid, and here is the man he paid, and here is that man's daughter's account for lettering it out afresh at 8 shillings the sheet, which your Grace's steward thought a very moderate figure. There is a kind of silence that has a floor to it, and a kind that has none, and the Duke of Hartland sat in the second kind the better part of a minute. He had gone into that morning, believing himself a man of very old blood, who happened also to be rich. He came out of the muniment room understanding that much of what he had been proudest of had been ordered, like the panel, from a tradesman by an ancestor who wanted it to tell better at a distance, and that the woman he had made a joke of before 40 neighbours had been turned out of every employment in his county on his own instruction, because his father had needed a pursuivant who would sign something. The first road, he said at last, leaves her father a forger and my grandmother a fiction, and lets me keep the fiction. It does. Then I will take the other. He got up. Write it out, and I will sign it tonight. And put in it, Miss Prowse, in whatever words you choose, that the matter was first stated to me by Miss Cecily Merrow in my own hall on the 9th of this month, before 40 witnesses, correctly and in every particular, and that I did not choose to hear her. That last is not necessary to the record, your grace. No, said the Duke of Hartland. It is necessary to me. He signed it at 11 that night. And then, because 6 days were left, and he had begun at last to do arithmetic, he sent for the carpenters. They took the panel down on the 13th in front of anybody who cared to watch, and a good many did. 12 feet of gold leaf and varnish came off the screen in sections and went out through the buttery door, and what was left was bare oak that had stood there since Elizabeth, 4 shades lighter where the achievement had been, with the ghost of the shield printed on it in clean wood. The coach panels were sanded, the seals went into a drawer, the hatchment ordered for the old Duchess was countermanded, and the plate for the prayer books was stopped at the printer's. On the 14th, the Duke of Hartland rode 3 miles into the market town by himself, asked at a stationer's shop, and went up a narrow stair. The door at the top stood open because the room was warm. She was at the table under the window with her sleeves pinned back, drawing the long downstroke of a capital, and she did not look up and did not stop, because you cannot stop in the middle of one. So he waited. The Duke of Hartland, who had never in his life waited for anybody in a doorway, stood on a bare landing that smelled of paper and size, and watched a woman finish a letter of the alphabet. When it was done, she laid the pen down across the neck of the ink bottle, exactly as she had in the great hall, and stood up. Your Grace. I have signed a disclaimer of the Ferrand quarter, he said. It went up by the mail this morning. It says that my father procured the entry and paid for it. It says what your father did, and it says that it was your father's ruin and my family's profit, and that we have had 4 generations of the good of it, and he had 1 payment and no name. Mr. Prowse tells me that where your father's name stands, struck through in the books of the college, this will stand beside it. He stopped. It does not make him honest. I cannot do that. It makes him a man who was bought by mine. She said nothing at all for a moment. And I have written to every man in this county who was told not to employ you, and told them who told them, and why, and that they may make what use of the letter they please. Sir Marmaduke has already made a great deal of use of his. You need not have put that in writing. I know it. It will be read out in inns. I know that too, said the Duke. Miss Merrow looked down at the ruled sheet on the table, and then she said the only unguarded thing she said to him in the whole of it. He taught me the hand I write with. I have been sitting here 4 days trying to decide whether I have ruined him or finished what he began, and I do not know, and I shall not know. You told the truth in a room where nobody wanted it, he said, which is what he was appointed to do and did not, and which is what I was born to and did not. I am not able to say anything better than that. He asked her then, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand, whether she would come to Hartland on the 18th, not to work, to stand in the hall. She said she would think of it. The king came on the 18th in the middle of the afternoon, in good weather, with the county lining the drive and the bells going in 3 parishes, and he came into a great hall full of light, with a fire built up in the stone hearth and 40 people standing on both sides, and at the north end of it, under the minstrel's gallery, a bare oak screen with the pale ghost of a shield on it and nothing else at all. He noticed it, of course. He was meant to. Mr. Nathaniel Prowse, York herald, stood at the Duke's shoulder in his tabard, and it was to Prowse that the king put the question, and Prowse, who knew precisely whose mouth a thing ought to come out of, said that his grace would answer for it himself. So the Duke of Hartland answered for it himself, bareheaded, in his own hall, in a carrying voice that had never in its life needed to be raised. He said that the achievement which had hung there had been wrong in the field, wrong in the helm, wrong in the coronet, and wrong in the second and third quarters, that the quarters had been wrong for 4 generations, and that his father had paid an officer of arms to make them so, and the officer had been broken for it, and had died poor, while the house that bought him kept the benefit. He had disclaimed the quarter. The screen would stay bare until the college told him what he was entitled to put on it. And then he said the rest of it, which nobody had required of him. He said that every one of those errors had been stated to him in that room, on the 9th, correctly and in order, by Miss Cecily Merrow, whom he had engaged at 8 shillings the sheet, and had thought it amusing to examine in front of his neighbours, that he had wagered a shilling she could not tell a fess from a bar, that when she answered him he had paid her off, turned her out of the hall, and afterwards out of every employment in the county, and that she had been right in every particular, and he had known within the hour that she was right, and had gone on regardless in front of everybody, because he had preferred to be wrong loudly than corrected quietly by a woman with ink on her hand. He turned, and found her where she was standing among the county in her grey gown and her crimson shawl, with her hands quiet in front of her, and the Duke of Hartland made her, before his sovereign and his neighbours and the king's own officer of arms, the bow he would have made to a duchess, and held it a long moment, and asked her pardon out loud where every soul in the hall could hear him. The king, who had a great deal of experience of ceremonial and none whatever of this, said after a pause that he had come 140 miles expecting to be shown a coat of arms, and had been shown something rather better, and asked to be presented to Miss Merrow, and Miss Merrow curtsied and was presented, and was asked 3 questions about the tinctures, and answered them. Afterwards the record was put right. Against the entry of the Ferrand descent in the books of the college there was written the fact of the disclaimer, the name of the Duke who procured it, and the name of the officer who made it. And beneath that, in the clerk's careful hand, the line Mr. Prowse had insisted upon, and Miss Merrow had not asked for, detected and stated. Upon inspection of the certified pedigree, by Cecily Merrow, daughter of the said Hugh Merrow. It is not an office. Women do not hold the offices of arms, and she never held one. But her name is in the books of the College of Arms, in the place where her father's is struck through, and it will be there when everybody now living is dead, which is a thing that cannot be bought for £11,000, or for a gratuity, or for anything else. She had all the work she could take before the month was out, a good deal of it from people who had refused her in the same week. And she took theirs too, at the same price, and never once mentioned it. The screen at Hartland stood bare through the autumn, and was repainted at the turn of the year, smaller than before, and correct, azure, a heart-springing argent, attired and unguelled, or on a chief or 3 mullets sable, the helm silver, garnished with gold, in profile and barred, the coronet, with its 8 strawberry leaves, 5 of them shone, as it should always have been. 2 quarters had gone out of it, and the shield was the better for it, the way a room is better for a bad picture being taken down. The Duke of Hartland came to see it uncovered with no company at all except the painters, and one other person whom he had written to ask, and who had come, and who was standing beside him, with her hands quiet in front of her. "Say it for me," he said. "You are supposed to know your own arms." "I am." "Say it, and I will have it after you, and if I get it wrong you may tell me so, and this time I shall be obliged to you." So she said it for him, plainly, the way her father had taught her before she could read the Psalms, and the Duke of Hartland said it after her, and got one word of it wrong, and was corrected, and said it again.